Welcome back to my YouTube channel and podcast Wonders and Miracles, where we get to celebrate miraculous moments in everyday lives. I'm your host, Liza Lawrence, and it has been a couple months since I've posted a video, so I'm glad to be back. But it's been a while because I've been working on some fun projects that I'd like to share with you real quick. I've been creating a couple journals, and the one I'd like to highlight today, it's called The Blessings I Witnessed Today. This is a Bible-based gratitude journal. And I want to read a quick scripture in here in the book. It's from 1 Thessalonians chapter 5, verse 18. In everything give thanks, for this is the will of God in Christ Jesus concerning you. Now, it's so interesting. Gratitude is one of the most important tools we can use in creating well-being and happiness in our lives. And not only does religion support that, but science supports it as well. There's evidence to show that as we record our blessings that we're grateful for, the miracles in our lives, it actually can rewire our brain to start to notice and see more positive things in our lives. It improves the immune system. It reduces stress and anxiety. There's so many benefits to gratitude and counting our blessings. So I created this with you in mind, with me in mind, and with this scripture that God has invited us and asked us to be grateful and to count our blessings. My interview today, he will be sharing some miracles throughout family history, stories that he's heard from his ancestors that had they not written them down in a journal, he wouldn't have record of those miracles that took place in their lives. So I want to challenge you to start writing down your blessings, your miracles, the experiences where you've seen God in your life. Record those and share those with your posterity. I know they will be blessed and you will be blessed. You can find this on Amazon.com or on my website, wondersandmiracles.com, under resources. And I really do challenge you to write these things down. I'll provide some links in the description below. And thank you also for your support in purchasing this book and starting to write and record the blessings that you've witnessed today. So now let's jump into my interview today with Victor from Utah. Today, Victor's going to share with us a few miracle experiences that he's had in his life. One from his childhood with a severed artery, an accident that happened, and another experience while he was on a building mission, building chapels in Utah, that his life was preserved in an accident. And then meeting his wife, serving in the military. There's so many beautiful miracles. And then later, after having a stroke, some of the miracles that he saw there. The thing I love about Victor's stories, which he'll tell us all the details, is that he has seen miracles throughout his whole life journey here on earth. You know, the miracles took place at different phases in his life, but they've obviously made an impact on him, knowing that he was being watched over and protected by guardian angels and God throughout his life. So, Victor, thank you so much for being on, and go ahead and start with your story when you were just 10 years old.
Okay. Well, actually, what it was is me and my younger brother were playing in the backyard, and he had a slingshot, and he was shooting me every once in a while. And I says, "Cut it out! I'm gonna get you." I had these pieces of this inner tube, and if I wrap it just right and pull it back, I could try to shoot him, but he was a lot better shot with that slingshot. Anyway, he hit me, and I got mad at him, and I started running after him. Well, he ran into the house. The house had it's a wooden door with a great big glass window in it. And so as I was right almost behind him, the door was partly open, because he'd partly closed it, but I was reaching for that doorknob just at the time. I think he stopped, turned around, kicked the door closed, and my arm went right through that window. It cut it clear to the bone. It severed arteries, tendons, blood was squirting everywhere, and so after that, my brother looked so shocked about what happened, and I hollered at him, I says, look, see what you did, I was upset at them still for, I guess, kicking the door and it closed. At the time, that particular house, we weren't living in, we had been remodeling it. So we lived just a little ways down from there. I was trying to hold my arm and walk down to the house. Well, in the meantime, my mother had had a baby and there was a woman that lived just about a block away. She came to see the baby. And so when I came in with blood going all over the place, she quickly grabbed, I think, a diaper, like a cloth diaper, put it around my arm, and then she had me lie down because she thought I was probably in shock too. But then she quickly called her husband. Her husband rushed over there and they put me in his car and rushed to the hospital. I don't think I would have made it if we had had to call the ambulance, because where we lived, it probably took 20 minutes or more for the ambulance to get there. Anyway, we got to the hospital by the time that I got there, and they put me from the emergency room on an operating table. I was starting to feel like I was starting to black out because I think I'd lost enough blood. I remember I had this t-shirt on. They were cutting that away and they were trying to clean up my arm. And they operated for a long time because they had to do a lot of, try to repair work. Anyway, they did a lot of sewing on my arm. Then they put it in a cast. Well, what they did is since these tendons are stretched when you put your arm this way, they had it relax this way and put it in the cast, kind of doubled over. Well, it took a long time to probably heal up. Now, this lower part of my hand, I didn't have any feeling here, but I did up here. And it took, I think, 10 years before I got the feeling back in my hand. So I managed to live through that.
One of the miracles that you had mentioned as you wrote in was that this woman was at your house at the right time and she knew how to really kind of stop the bleeding. Was that correct? Like if she maybe wouldn't have been there, it would have been worse than what actually happened.
Yeah, I don't know if my mother would have really known exactly what to do. So it was a good thing that this woman was there at the time, and she was, I guess, experienced with first aid. Her husband ran kind of a towing service type thing, and so she was, I guess, familiar with accidents and first aid and things like that.
Yeah, so that was a blessing that she was right there and could take you to the hospital where, if your mom had just had a baby, maybe she wouldn't have been able to. And so the right people at the right time really did help save your life in that story and that experience.
One thing I remember is when riding in the car, he was going down the freeway pretty fast, trying to get to the hospital. But I remember looking and he had red seat covers, and I thought, oh, well, maybe it wouldn't show the blood if I did, get it on the seat covers.
That's funny. I could see a little kid thinking that. That's cute.
I guess the next episode is when I was 19. I was called on a building mission. I hadn't really planned on going on a mission. From January of 1964 to January of 1966, I was in Utah building chapels for the church. Now, my first area that I was in Beaver, Utah. It's an older chapel, and what it was is we were putting an addition onto the side of it. We were planning on taking out part of that wall of the existing chapel. One thing that happened is they'd put a temporary wall behind that brick wall. It was inside the chapel because they were going to take part of that wall out. Well, in the meantime, they were leaving little columns of brick every once in a while and trying to take that out. Well, the thing that happened is we weren't expecting this whole thing to just come down at once. I was standing on a concrete wall on the newer building. It was my companion was saying, look up at that wall. It's starting to shift and cracks opening up and the wall's starting to settle. And so I was hollering to the guys that were working down there. They had a scaffold. It was, this chapel had a basement. So they were down there working on that. When it all came down, I don't even think they had time to hear me anything. And the funny thing is nobody even got hurt at all. The scaffold they had, when the bricks started coming down, it was, on this side of the scaffold, and it just pushed that scaffold over, which some of the guys hit the ground running and the bricks were coming down, but nobody was seriously injured or killed. I mean, that was amazing to me,
That is amazing. And definitely as missionaries doing service work, I'm sure the Lord was protecting all of you in that situation.
So, but the last time was when I was working in a trench. It was over my head. We were putting, from the chapel out, we were putting a sewer line in. And so they had a trench dug that was over my head. The pipe that we were using, it's kind of a clay that had been hardened. Well, it has a bell shape on one end, and then it has a straight end on the other, and it has like a little rubber seal on those. It's kind of a neoprene type seal. And so you had to put some type of lubricant or grease. What I was doing is they'd hand me a length of pipe. I got down on my hands and knees, and I had to wiggle and I had to push as hard as I can for it to finally snap in to that seal. And so I just barely had got that done, and I started standing up when a little bit of dirt started falling. And what I thought is, usually I thought somebody's trying to hand me down another piece of pipe, but when I looked up, the whole side of the trench was coming like this. I had a aluminum type hard hat on, and it just broke over the top of my head and bent that that aluminum hard hat. Anyway, something that went clear through my chin, chipped the teeth on the front. But they had to dig me out. The more that I wiggled when I was in that trench, the dirt would sift down tighter and tighter. So it was clear up to here on my chest. And so it made it even hard to breathe if I was trying to get myself out. So they had to get down there with shovels and dig all around before I could get out. They even had a little newspaper article about it that says, Victor was glad that he was at least 6'3" or 4" at the time. He says, otherwise I might have buried him. But if I would have been still on my hands and knees, pushing that pipe together when the trench caved in, I mean, I would have been flattened and buried and wouldn't have survived.
Yeah, that's amazing. So the fact that you were standing up saved your life in that situation as it caved in.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, that was one time I probably wouldn't forget.
Yeah.
I know through my life, there's so many different times, different things happen. And I was commenting to a neighbor he had a lot of things happen. I says, I think when we were young, I think our guardian angels were pretty busy watching over us.
Right, intervening. Okay, we got to step in here. Go get him here. Busy guardian angels. I love it.
Right after I got home from a building mission in 1966, I was drafted into the Army. And the first thing I thought is, well, here it goes. I'll probably be in Vietnam. And I was worried about that because I heard somebody say, oh, don't let them draft you because they could put you right in the front lines and you might be the first one to get shot. I remember praying about it one time, and I felt the impression saying that if you live the way that you're supposed to, you will be all right. You'll come home. And I thought, well, is that my own feelings or is the Lord actually trying to tell me something? Now I look back on it and I think the Lord was trying to tell me something. after 8 weeks of basic training, then we were supposed to get a 2-week leave. And then they sent me to the next place, which I was at Fort Lewis, Washington. Well, for some reason, I didn't get the 2-week leave that I was supposed to. So I got to the next place before I guess I was supposed to, in other words. And so it would be right in the middle of a training cycle. And there was 2 or 3 of us, and they didn't know exactly what to do with us because we weren't supposed to start for several weeks, into our next training cycle. And the training cycle started, and after a few weeks, all of a sudden they told a lot of us, there's orders already come down for you to go somewhere else, Everybody in the whole unit, the way everything was being shipped to Vietnam, and I thought for sure it looked like we'd be going to Vietnam. Well, when I got there, they'd read your last name and then where you're going. I remember everything saying, Vietnam, Vietnam, Korea, Korea, Vietnam, Korea, Vietnam, Windsor, Germany. And I go, what?
Wow.
So I picked up the paper and I thought, well, at least I'm not going to Vietnam or South Korea. So I thought that was like, I felt somehow because of that mix up on supposed to have a leave, somehow something got mixed up or twisted to where orders were changed. Now I almost relate that to something that happened to my father. He was drafted in World War II. And the unit, all this training unit, they all were going to be shipped out to, the Pacific because they were fighting the Japanese. Well, my father suddenly come down with red spots all over his body. So they put him in the hospital and they didn't know what it was and didn't know if it was contagious. But he was in there for maybe a couple of weeks. And then when they did finally let him out and he was transferred to Europe, well, where he was drafted, he had missed all of the major battles. So by the time he got there, it was almost at the end of the war. They says, had he been on that ship that went to the Pacific, it was torpedoed by the Japanese submarine and everybody except 3 men were killed.
Wow.
So I was almost thinking of a similarity with the way the orders were for me. Somehow it was a mix-up. Well, anyway, I think back later, and I would be the 3rd generation to serve in Europe. My grandfather, World War I, my father in World War II, and then I during Vietnam War, but there was no war going on in Europe, so
wow.
I was just stationed there. And I thought that was kind of in a way, a miracle.
Yeah, that's amazing. Definitely feels like a divine intervention of sending you to Germany instead of Vietnam. And I love that connection with 3 generations serving in Europe and stationed there. That's pretty amazing.
Yeah, I felt like I was blessed, to be sent there. I could even mention that later, that how I met my wife, Maureen. I was working in California at the time, This was a few years after I'd come back from Germany. I was in California, and I felt a strong impression that if I moved to Utah, I would be married probably within a year. My mother was worried about me probably ever getting married, and sometimes I'd be out working on a car and she would tap on the side of the car with a broom and she said, Victor, you get out from under there and you call a girl this minute for a date. Her twin sister lived in Logan, Utah. And so she talked me into driving her up to Utah. She went to visit relatives and stuff. Then she says, talk to her sister, and hey, how about if Victor would come and stay with you, and maybe he could find a girl that, well, eventually I did. I met Maureen, and the funny thing is, Well, she just returned from a mission in 71. She'd been spent 2 years in Argentina. So she was finishing up at Utah State, and she had graduated the summer of 72. So anyway, I started to date her. Eventually, she got a job teaching school in Soda Springs, so we'd only see each other on the weekend. This went on, and I asked her one day, I says, I wanted to know how you feel. In other words, I wondered if she was just trying to be nice to go on a date with me, or if she actually was feeling the way I was, which I was falling in love, you know. So she said that she was feeling the same way, I guess, that I was. And so then in talking to her, I says, well, do you think we should go ahead and get engaged then? She says, well, that sounds like a good idea. But so I remember, I think it was the next weekend when she came back down, we went down to the jewelry store, and I didn't know what to pick out. I thought I'll let her pick out the ring and everything else. She picked out a ring that there's one diamond in the middle, and then there's 6 little diamonds around that. But we did have 7 children, 6 sons and 1 daughter. But our very last one, our 7th one, was born stillborn. I didn't think about it until later. I says, you know what? Those 6 little diamonds meant 6 little kids.
Yeah, that's sweet.
So anyway, after our kids were raised, we went on a mission together, and we were called to Alabama, where from 2011 to 2013, we served in the Alabama Birmingham mission. Then we came back home, and then about 2018, I guess is when I had a stroke. I remember at first, the left side of my body, I couldn't move my arm. It's like it just hung there loose. I mean, I could walk, and I was having troubles, and they decided they better take me to the hospital. They run a series of tests, and that's when they said that he's got not only meningitis, but he's got MRSA. I didn't hear that, but I guess the doctors told my wife or family, I don't think he's going to make it, you know, the way it looks. I know I had some priesthood blessings. In fact, my cousin came down, and he had the missionaries with him, and they gave me a blessing. And looking back on it, I figured the blessings, even the ward, I think, had a fast and a prayer for me. And I made it through that because I had a cousin that was a nurse, and she says, I don't think he's going to make it either. So I was in the hospital for about a month. And the doctors even said that they didn't think I was going to walk and function the way I should, you know. And so at first I used the walker, but then by the time that I finally came home, I thought, hey, I really don't need this walker. I can manage now by myself. It's funny how things work out, that sometimes miracles will happen where, you know, what seems like you're going to die, you survive. I look back on my ancestors, especially my grandmother. I mean, her life was miracles. What it was is her father, Tobias Tobiasen, came from Iceland. I don't think his wife was converted, but he was. And the missionaries told him, if you come to America, you would be healed. He had tuberculosis at the time, and he was mainly bedridden a lot. Looked like he was just going to die. So he took the missionaries' word for it. They went from Iceland to England. His wife was saying, you're foolish to ever go because they're not going to let you into the United States. If you have tuberculosis, they're going to quarantine you there and won't let you in, you know. And the trouble is, you probably won't make it to the United States. You'll probably die and leave those 2 little children. He took a daughter who was 9 and a son who was 7 with him. See, they'd had 11 children, and he took 2 out of the middle. So my grandmother says that she remembers when he came out of the one building. I guess doctors had checked him over. He had a big smile on his face, and he says, "I'm healed." And then the daughter eventually, she would become my grandmother. When she was younger, before she left out, when she was younger, she got a fever. I don't know if it was like rheumatic fever. The parents thought she was going to die. She came close to being so bad that they thought she was going to die. And she told her parents that angels had told her that she would live and she'd come to America. They didn't know. Maybe she's hallucinating. How could that be? So within just a few years after that, that's when the father had the missionaries tell him, if you come to America, you will be healed. So anyway, when my grandmother got old enough that she would marry my grandfather, before you're married, they gave you a final checkup. The doctors did. They says, first off, you've got a heart problem. One of the heart valves isn't working quite right. And they said, and secondly, you're a free bleeder. If you ever try to have any children, you'd bleed to death and die. They gave her maybe 6 months to a year to live. So they went to the temple, but the temple president gave her a special blessing. Now, the next day, which was her birthday, is when they decided to get married. But she lived to be 93, and she had 10 children. I think of that as some of the miracles.
It's amazing. It sounds like you have definitely a rich history of miracles in your family history and in your life. And I think it's just beautiful, all of these stories. So beautiful. With all of these miracles and experiences in your life, how has it strengthened your testimony of God? Or what has it taught you about God?
Well, I feel that the Lord has really blessed me. I mean, when I look back over my life now, things that you wonder, how did this work out? I should have probably died. Or how was it that everything seemed to work out right? And I remember wondering, well, there must be a certain purpose for me to be here, or else I wouldn't still be alive. Well, it's interesting how things work out.
And definitely, and I see it in my life and everyone's lives, just such beautiful divine, what I call divine orchestration, where it's like things happen at the right time in the right place and they feel miraculous because it's nothing we planned. It's nothing we thought of, but they just happened. And there's divine order to it. And those are miracles. And I do think you've seen, having your life preserved, but also serving in Germany rather than in Vietnam, like definitely interventions where God said, we've got to preserve his life. And these are the ways we're going to do it. So thank you for sharing your beautiful stories and the miracles that you've seen throughout your life. I love to celebrate those with anyone who's willing to share them. So thank you very, very much.
Okay. Well, thank you.
All right. I just want to thank Victor for sharing his beautiful miracle stories. And once again, I love that he knows some of his family history and the rich miracles that took place throughout his family line. And I think he knows that because they recorded their stories. So once again, I would encourage you to grab this journal. It's on Amazon.com or wondersandmiracles.com. The Blessings I Witnessed Today, a Bible-based gratitude journal. I'll provide the links below where you can start recording your miracles and blessings in your life, so your posterity will also have a witness that God was intimately involved in your journey as well. Have a great day. If you love miracle stories and want to hear more, hit like and subscribe so you'll be notified when the next video comes out. And I just want you to have a blessed day. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.